Welcome to episode 8 of Duties of the Heart by Rabbi Bachya Ibn Pakuda, and in this episode we are going to be looking at chapter 7 of the Unity of God, and in this Rabbi Bachya is going to give 7 examples or logical arguments that prove God's oneness in 7 different ways. So let's begin. Arguments for the proposition that God is one. Since it has been demonstrated by way of logical argument that the world has a creator, it is now our duty to inquire as to whether he is one or more than one. It is necessary to prove the true nature of his oneness from 7 different perspectives. The first argument is drawn from examining the cause of existing things. For when we consider these causes, we find that they are fewer than their effects. The further back we go in tracing the cause of causes, the fewer causes we find. The higher we ascend in the hierarchy of causes, the lower their number becomes, until finally, when we reach the top, there is only one cause, which is the cause of all causes, namely God. Let us now elaborate. Individual things are innumerable. But when we consider the species which comprise them, we find their number to be fewer than the individual things included in them. For each of the species consists of many individuals, and the species are limited in number. When we group the different species into classes, the number of classes will be less than the number of species contained in them, as there are many species in each class. The higher we ascend the hierarchy of classes, the lower their numbers, until finally they are reduced to their fundamental categories. The philosopher Aristotle has pronounced the fundamental categories to be 10 in number. Number 1, essence. Number 2, quantity. Number 3, quality. Number 4, relation. Number 5, place. Number 6, time. Number 7, situation. Number 8, possession. Number 9, activity. And number 10, passivity. Now let's stop there and get some commentary on these various categories. So let's look at Chovot HaLevavot, which is a commentary on the duties of the heart. And let's try and get some clarifications about these categories. So he says, everything and every creature by itself is called an individual, such as one man or one living thing like a horse or a mule or grass or a tree. The term kind refers to a group of individuals such as the species of man or the species of horses. The term group refers to something which includes many kinds, such as living creature, which includes the species of man and all the various living things, animals, birds, fish, etc. The term type is more general, as you would say the term growing things includes all the trees and plants and all the other living creatures. There is a higher type, namely composite, of elements, which includes inanimate objects like stones, metals, and all growing things. There is another type even more inclusive, such as the term physical, which also includes 4 elements, but which only includes physical things, until the term essence, etzem, which includes everything, every existing things, whether physical or spiritual. This is the type which is over and above most general and is called the supernal type. So this etzem that is referred to here is the first of these categories, which is essence. Now let's look at some. Let's look further at this this thing called like an essence. the etzem, the essence, and mikra, the incidents. So let's look, Pas Lechem comments here. In order to understand the following things, you need to know that all the philosophers agreed that everything exists in the world as composed of essence and incidents. The etzem, or essence, is the essence of everything, which never changes as long as the thing exists. Through it, we're able to know what is and what is not its essence. Mikra, or incident, is something which is not essential for the thing, and it can exist without it. Sometimes it is attached to it, and sometimes not. While something which is in its essence is found on it always. So, for example, hotness is something found in hot water, and as a mikra, as an incidental incidence. But in fire, it is essence. Since you cannot remove hotness from, you can remove hotness from water without destroying the water, but you cannot remove the hotness from fire without destroying the fire. So heat is an incidence or a mikra of fire, but fire is the essence. Let's carry on. Let's look at Pas Lechem. Also comments about the mikra, the incidents. The incidents is that which could happen to occur to the etzem, the essence. Sometimes like this and sometimes like that. The etzem is always one thing, while the mikra divides into 9 parts through which all things are included. So let's look at these 9 attributes of incidental properties or non-essence properties. So first is quantity. This is when you describe a thing by its measure, namely when you wish to label it by its measure and you call it the long or the short or the tall or the low or the height. Quality. This is when you describe or label something by one of its physical or non-physical properties. For example, you describe it the white or the black or the solid or the liquid. Relation. When you describe this and label it and relative to something else, and through this label both are described, such as when you describe one as a father or a master. From this label we know for certain that he has a son or a servant, since there is no father without a son and no master without its servant. Place. This is when you describe something and give it a sign by its place. For example, Mr. X who lives in house Y or in city Z. Time. Describing and label a thing by its known time. For example, Mr. X was born at a date and time Y. Situation. Describing something through its situation. For example, the sitting or the lying down or falling on his face. Possession. Describing a thing by the possessions it's acquired for itself. For example, he is wearing X clothing or with hair X, or as long as it is not separated from it, it can be described through this. Activity. This refers to describing the etzem by one of its changes in it, or that it divests itself from one form and dons another, such as earth, which is changed to a mouse, through example food ingested by its mother, or through an incident that its measure changes, that it was small and grew, or that it was white and darkened. And the last of these 9 categories of incidental properties is passivity. That you describe the doer through changes which occur to their thing done unto, because everything done unto has an external doer which causes it these changes. For example, that you say that from the tree was done a chair. The changes to the etzem of the tree happened indirectly, and the craftsman who caused the changes is one who did them. Likewise, for something which existed in potential and went out to actual, and changed from potential to actual, there must have been an external doer which brought out this potential to actual. So those are the 9 categories of incidental properties of a mikra, and also there is the 10th, which is the essence, which is the beginning, which is the essence of something, and it has 9 categories of incidental properties. There's a lot to take in, but I hope you can get the gist of this. So let's continue. Rabbi Bachya continues. When we trace the causes of all individual things included in the species of these 10 categories, we find that there are 5: motion and the 4 elements, namely fire, air, water, and earth. When we trace the causes of these 4 elements, we find that they are 2, matter and form. And what causes them? The number of their causes will no doubt be even smaller. Their cause is the will of the Creator, may He be exalted. The only number less than 2 is 1, and so the Creator must, of necessity, be 1. The same was said by King David. Kingship Now let's move on to the second of these 7 arguments. The second argument is drawn from the sign of wisdom which are manifest throughout the world, in its upper and lower regions, in its minerals, vegetation and animals. When we study the world, it shows us that it is entirely the plan of one designer, the work of a single creator. For we find that with all the differences in its substances and elements, it shows uniformity in its effects and its parts. The sign of the Creator's wisdom, manifest in the smallest as in the largest creatures, testify that they have one wise Creator. If the world really had more than one Creator, diverse forms of wisdom would be manifest in its different parts and in its species and individuals. Furthermore, we find that the world's stability and perfect balance rests on the interdependence of its parts. No part is complete unless complemented by another. Just as links in a chain armor, the parts of a bed, the organs of the human body, or the components of other composite things complement each other and need each other to function properly. One can see plainly that the moon and the stars need the light of the sun. The earth needs the sky and the water. Animals are dependent on one another, as some species, birds, fish and beasts of prey, for instance, feed on others. Man needs the world, and the world for its perfection needs man. Countries and towns, the sciences and the arts are interdependent. Wisdom is manifest in the smallest as in the largest creatures. The force of wisdom displayed in the creation of the elephant in its great body size is not more marvelous than the force of wisdom displayed in the creation of the ants in its tininess. On the contrary, the smaller the creature, the more evident in it is the force of wisdom and power, the more marvelous and manifest the creator's achievements. What this shows is that all things are the conceptions of one designer, one creator. For all things reflect uniformity and are coordinated to achieve a perfect, stable and comprehensive world order. If the world had more than one creator, diverse forms of wisdom would be manifest in its different parts, which would not then be interdependent. Since the world, in spite of all the differences in its substances and elements, shows uniformity in its products and combinations, one may conclude that its creator, composer, governor and designer is one. Aristotle said, "There is nothing in what God had created that is more wonderful than what he has created," meaning that wisdom is manifest uniformly and equally in the smallest as in the largest parts of creation. This idea was also expressed by King David when he spoke of the world's natural order and facility for supporting life. "How manifold are your works, Hashem! With wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creations." And also, he also says, King David, "How great are your works, God! How exceedingly..." Now I'd like to talk about something that I think is very important at this point. If we are to investigate God's creation and identify from it and give ourselves proof that the universe has an intelligent designer, we should spend time and effort to investigate something called the golden ratio or the divine ratio, and perhaps we can glimpse God's handiwork in evidence throughout nature and throughout a lot of our lives, the architecture that surrounds us. But let's look at nature, which is really from God's fingertips. So what is the golden ratio or the golden mean? It's a mathematical constant that appears repeatedly in nature and artwork. Rabbi Bachya has indicated that when you see that if there is a letter written in one type of handwriting and it doesn't change, it must prove that there is one creator. So to further qualify this reasoning, we should look at the constants in nature, and it will give us further proof. So what's so special about this number, this ratio? Well, simply, if the ratio of the sum of two quantities to the larger quantities is equal to the larger quantity to the smaller quantity, then the two quantities are said to have a golden ratio. So this golden ratio is as a number, 1.62. So 1 to 1.62 is a ratio. There's things that you may be familiar with, a golden rectangle or a golden spiral in geometry. A golden rectangle is a rectangle whose sides lengths are in the golden ratio, which is approximately 1 by 1.68. It follows 1 by 0.61. It follows the Fibonacci sequence 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 24, 34. This Fibonacci series is given by adding the previous number to the last number, and you get this ratio enlargement. So a golden spiral is a logarithmic spiral whose growth factor is the golden ratio. That is, the golden spiral gets wider or further from its origin by a factor of 1.62 for every quarter turn it makes. You find the golden spiral, this divine principle. There's a reason why they called it a divine ratio, because it seems God-given, or God set this in motion. We find the golden spiral in many things in nature. A cross-section of a seashell is an excellent example of it. We also find it in our own human body. Look at your fingers, or your arm, your upper arm to your lower arm to your wrist and your fingers. These all contain the golden ratio, the measurement, the golden ratio. DNA structure, the arrangement of petals and flowers, branching in trees. Branching in trees is done by something called the golden angle, which I'll come to. But also the pine cone also is a very symbolic golden spiral shape. Fruitlets of pineapples. Even when you look at nature, weather, hurricanes, when you see it from above, it follows that spiral. Galaxies follow this Fibonacci divine ratio spiral. But let's look at something called the golden angle. The golden angle technically speaking, is the angle subtended by the smaller arc when two arcs that make up a circle are in the golden ratio. So if you're watching the video, I have some slides that indicate exactly what I'm talking about. So in geometry, the golden angle is the smaller of the two angles created by sectioning the circumference of a circle according to the golden ratio. That is, into two arcs, such that the ratio of the length of the small arc to the length of the larger arc is the same as the ratio of the length of the larger arc to the full circumference of the circle. So if you are imagining that a plant is growing or a tree is starting to grow, the degree of rotation is 137.5 degrees from zero. So if you imagine the first petal if you imagine a clock, a 360 degree clock, one petal will sprout at zero. Then, in order to get the best coverage and the most effective coverage or spread of leaves, the first petal will sprout at zero. You move around 137.5 degrees, then the next petal will sprout. Then you move another 137.5 degrees from this second point, and you reach the, let's say, 9 o'clock point of a clock, and so on. And you see that after successive rotations, the spreading is like a sunflower face. This what we identify as that golden ratio spiral. And it's something that we are taught by Rabbi Bachya and by Rambam to investigate these mathematical signs of God's handiwork in nature. And I urge the listeners here to spend 10 minutes on a YouTube video that indicates golden spirals in nature. Because I believe that it's a commandment to know God. And to know God, you have to investigate God's handiwork. And a beautiful way of doing this is by familiarizing yourself with these constants in nature that God has set in place. And I think it's, if you're intending to elevate your soul and to become closer to God, this is kind of part of the coursework that one has to do. Spend a bit of time looking at God's handiwork. There are beautiful examples on YouTube of videos to this effect. And then maybe next time you're with your child or you go to the park and you're looking at the trees, you'll see in every tree the same way that branches spread out and that leaves on petals of flowers spread out. It's the same 137.5 degree rotation, this golden angle. And you'll think, wow, this is throughout nature, and you'll see how beautifully this like Rabbi Bachya's concept of God's handwriting is uniform. You see it in nature, and perhaps that's part of the coursework of being a human being that wants to look for God in everything. So I wanted to add that, and now let's get back to Rabbi Bachya. So let's move on to the third argument of these 7 arguments that prove the oneness of God. And he continues, the third argument is based on the fact that the entire world was brought into existence from non-existence. Having demonstrated that the world was brought into existence from non-existence, we were forced to conclude that someone created it, as it is impossible for something to have come into existence on its own. When we find that a thing exists, it is clear to us that it came into existence after having been previously non-existent. We know, by testimony of a sound mind, that something other than itself created it, brought it into existence and formed it. Since it has been established that the world has a creator who created it and brought it into existence, there is no need to consider the possibility that there is more or less than one creator, for there could not be a world without even one creator. If it were possible to conceive of a world with a creator who was less than one, we would so conceive him. But since we cannot conceive of something less than one, which can make something else, we may conclude that he is one. For in the case of things that are verifiable by way of adducing proofs, when their existence is proved conclusively, we need not assume them to be more than is necessary to account for the phenomenon that constitutes their proof. An analogy is as follows. If we should see a manuscript that is uniform in composition and is written in one handwriting, it would immediately occur to us that one individual wrote and composed it, for it is inconceivable that it was written by less than one person. If that were possible, however, we would assume that to be the case, although it is theoretically possible that more than one person were involved in writing it. It would be unwarranted to make such an assumption, unless there was corroborating evidence to that effect, such as a change in the handwriting in part of the manuscript or some similar type of indication. This being so, there is no need for us, in our case, to meet the author face to face, if that way of coming to know him is impossible. Rather, it is enough to see the manuscript. The inferences drawn about the author from his work, from his handwriting style, serve us instead of our actually meeting him. We may conclude with certainty, based on the consistent style and uniformity of the manuscript, that there existed one writer who, schooled and skilled in the craft, wrote it, and that no one else collaborated with him in writing it. A work written by two different authors would be marked by diversity, lack of uniformity, and inconsistency of style, and would fluctuate in quality and character. The same can be said of the Creator, may he be exalted, because the signs of wisdom manifested in his creations are uniform in character. It is necessary for us to believe that one Creator created them. For the existence of all created things is impossible without him, and he is not something that can be seen, like substances or accidents. Since he cannot be seen, it is impossible to learn of his existence and attain knowledge of him except by way of logical argument, and through observations of his creations which give evidence of him. In this way will our faith be strong that he exists and he is one. He is eternal, who was and will be the first and last. He is mighty, wise, living. Since he is not visible, the inferences we draw about him serve us instead of actually seeing him. For this reason, it is necessary for us to conceive of one Creator who created all. For without him, the existence of everything that has come into existence would be impossible. But existence would be possible without there being more than one Creator. There is no need for more than one Creator. Therefore, if anyone maintains that the Creator is more than one, his words do not stand, unless he supports them with a proof other than the one which we have cited. It is impossible, however, to support such a claim, for rational arguments do not contradict each other. Rather, they all testify to God's oneness and rule out any attribution of his plurality, association, or similarity. As God himself declared in Yeshayahu 44:8, "Is there a God beside me? There is no rock that I do not know." And also continuing in Yeshayahu, "I am the first and I am the last." And also, quoted in Yeshayahu, "It was yet my hand that founded the earth, my right hand that spread out the heavens. I call to them and they endure in harmony." And finally also from Yeshayahu 45:21, "There is no God beside me, righteous and redeeming." Now let's move on to the fourth argument for the oneness of God. To anyone who thinks the Creator is more than one, we say that the essence of all these supposed creators must be either one or not one. If he says that the essence is one, then it is one thing, and the Creator is not more than one. If he says that each of them has an essence which is not that of any other, it follows necessarily that there is a separation between them, due to their difference and otherness. Now, whatever is separated is limited, and whatever is limited is finite, and whatever is finite is composite, and whatever is composite has been brought into existence, and whatever has been brought into existence has a creator. It follows then that he who thinks that the Creator is more than one must also assume that he is created. We have already demonstrated, however, that the Creator of the world is eternal, the causes of all causes, and the beginning of all beginnings. As it quotes from Nehemiah, who is as it's quoted in Nehemiah 9:6, you are the one who is God, you alone. So let's look at some commentary related to that section, the fourth argument. And the Pas Lechem comments on this. If the Creator is more than one, it must be that each part has its own essence by himself. If so, we must say that there is a separation between them, namely some boundary which separates between their essence, since they are split. If so, there is a boundary between them which separates them, and behold, each one is limited, since each one does not spread out infinitely, since that would leave no existence for the second. Therefore, each has an end and a limit. If so, each has the attribute of extent and spreading out, since its limit is the extent of its spreading out. And anything which has the attribute of extent and spreading out can receive division. And whatever can receive division is compound of parts, and anything composite must be brought into existence, and as clarified earlier, that the parts preceded it. And anything brought into existence has a creator, since a thing cannot make himself. And the Marper Lenefesh, another commentary, quotes from Yesodei HaTorah by Rambam, chapter 1, halacha 7. This God is one. He is not two or more, but one. If there were many gods, they would have body and form, because like entities are separated from each other only through the circumstances associated with body and form. Were the Creator to have a body and form, he would have limitation and finiteness, because it is impossible for a body not to be limited. And any entity which itself is limited and defined possesses only limited and defined power. Since our God, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, possesses unlimited power, as evidenced by the continuous motion of the spheres, we can see that his power is not the power of a body. Since he is not a body, the circumstances associated with bodies that produce divisioning and separation are not relevant to him. Therefore, it is impossible for him to be anything other than one. The knowledge of this concept fulfills a positive commandment, as implied by Devarim, chapter 6, Pasuk 4, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And now we will move on to the fifth argument, arguing the oneness of God. So let's continue. The fifth argument is drawn from the meaning of the concepts of plurality and oneness. Euclid, in his book, defined oneness as follows. Oneness is that notion and virtue of which a thing is said to be one. This means that oneness is prior by nature to the thing which is one. Now let's move on to the fifth argument, arguing for the oneness of God. The fifth argument is drawn from the meaning of the concepts of plurality and oneness. Euclid, in his book, defines oneness as follows. Oneness is that notion in virtue of which a thing is said to be one. This means that oneness is prior by nature to the thing which is one, just as we say that heat precedes anything that is hot. If there were no oneness, nothing could be said to be one. The idea we should form in our minds of oneness is of absolute uniqueness and solitariness, that which has no associations or comparisons whatsoever, is totally devoid of plurality and number, and has been neither combined with anything nor separated from anything. The idea of plurality is the sum of many ones. Plurality cannot then precede oneness, of which it is an aggregate. When we discover with our minds or with the senses a plurality, we can be sure that oneness preceded it, just as the number one precedes all other numbers. It follows then that he who thinks that the Creator is more than one must of necessity admit that there was one who preceded them all, as the number one precedes the other numbers, as oneness precedes plurality. The Creator then is necessarily one. He is eternal, there being no one external outside of him, as it is said in Yeshayahu 43:10, "Before me no God was formed, nor will there be after me." Now, the sixth argument is drawn from the consideration of the accidental properties that are attached to everything that is plural. Plurality is an accidental property superadded to the substance of a thing, namely quantity. God created substance and accidents. Hence, not one of their attributes may be ascribed to the essence of His glory, as it has been demonstrated from reason and from Scripture, that the Creator is exalted above any resemblance or comparison to one of His created beings. And as the plurality superadded to the substance of a thing is an accidental property, it follows that no attribute of plurality may rightly be ascribed to the essence of the glory of the Creator. And if He cannot be described as plural, then He is necessarily one. For between plurality and oneness there is no middle term. Hence, the Creator is not more than one. Rather, He is of necessity one. As Hannah said in Shmuel chapter 1, there is no one holy like God. There is no one except you. So now the final and seventh argument. If the Creator were more than one, then each of them either could have created the world by himself, or could not have created it except with the help of the other. If we assume that any one of them could have created it by himself, then any other creator is superfluous, for the one can do without the help of the other. If we assume that creation could not have been completed unless the creators collaborated, it follows that not one of them is completely sovereign or all-powerful. As each one is incapable and limited, each one is weak. Now, what is weak is limited in its power and essence. What is limited is finite. What is finite is composite. What is composite is created. And what is created has a creator. Consequently, what is weak could not possibly be eternal, for the eternal one falls short of nothing and needs no help. Consequently, the creator is not more than one. So very, very logical steps to reach these arguments, these confirmations. If it were possible for the Creator to be more than one, there might have been disagreement between the creators in regard to the creating, and the creation might not have been accomplished by them. Since we find that the whole world follows one order, and uniform motion is found in all its parts, never changing throughout the generations, and we can be certain that its creator and governor is one. No one beside him can alter his work or change his rules, as it is said in Yeshayahu, who, as I can call out the generations from the start, let him foretell it and arrange it for me. And also King David said in Tehillim chapter 119, forever God, your world stands firm in the heavens. Your faithfulness is for all generations. You have established the earth and it endures. What we can see from the Creator's perfect government of creation is that a government can be perfectly steady and consistent only when policy and controls are like the soul in the body. Aristotle has stated in his book, in reference to unity, it is not good when there are many heads, but only when there is one head. And also King Shlomo said in Mishlei 28:2, when a land rebels, its rulers are many. So, what we have mentioned on this subject is sufficient for anyone endowed with understanding. It is also sufficient to refute the doctrine of the dualists, the Christian Trinitarians, and the like. For by establishing the oneness of the Creator of the world, we refute the contention of anyone who claims that He is more than one. Know this well. And that concludes these chapter 7, which is the 7 arguments for the oneness of God. And although this is quite a deep subject, it's worth trying to get your head around it, because also, Rabbi Bachya includes it as the first gate. This is the first step you have to take, is to toil in your mind about the philosophy or the logic behind believing or knowing that there is a God. like Rambam says in Yesodei Torah, it is a positive mitzvah to know that there is a God, not just to believe, to know that there is a God. So you have to toil through scientific facts that seem to prove that there is that the God exists, and this is not by chance, and you have to put the work in, and both of them, Rabbi Bachya and Rambam, include this as their first steps, or the kind of foundation of everything. Is this belief in unity, to dispel the concept that God is what we're used to thinking, because we tend to think of things anthropomorphically or in human terms, and that would perhaps give the wrong direction to look in, or the wrong kind of understanding of God's unity. In my opinion, God is like an all-pervading force throughout and beyond the universe, and you cannot think of him as a white-bearded man with flowing robes. That's not the right way to think, because that limits him in space and time, and that's not what God is. God is an all-pervading force throughout and beyond the universe, and here Rabbeinu Bachya very logically gives 7 arguments in favor of that fact, and next episode we will be dealing with chapter 8, which is an explanation of the forms of the relative one and the absolute one. This is something that Rabbeinu Bachya mentioned earlier, that is important to understand the differences, and we'll investigate this next episode.